How's it going, everyone? I'm VenomousStare, and I have an exciting game for you today. It's a Zerg versus Protoss on the map Daybreak, which is widely considered to be one of the most classic, balanced macro maps in all of StarCraft 2. And honestly, this map is the one that's often pointed to as the one that you should play on if you want to have a legitimate source of competition. Really, everyone likes this map. It's very standard, in fact, that it's so standard and so kind of vanilla and well-liked and playable that people would often criticize subsequent maps after this one was played to death and removed from the ladder pool for a while of being too much like it. Oh, this map's too much like Daybreak. These maps are too similar to Daybreak. These maps are Daybreak copycats. You would always hear these statements regarding standard maps, and let's talk about what makes a standard map. So the main of Daybreak, notice that the sides of it aren't directly connected to the ground. Like, notice how there's dead air between the main base and the outside, like other land. That's because if you're playing against Protoss and your entire base surrounding you is surrounded by land, the Protoss player can pretty much blink up into your main and harass you constantly. So that's something to look for whenever you, especially if you play Terran. That's something that you should look for in a map, is how much of my main base is exposed. Like on Daybreak, it's pretty much this corner is the only part of your main that has land right below it. So another thing is the natural ramp. Now, the natural ramp on Daybreak is pretty much perfect size, in the sense that you can wall it in with a few buildings, but it's not so easy to wall in where cheese is worthless. We saw Creature do a fast expand, of course, made a gateway and a cyber after. Vibe made a quick 3 hatcheries and is making mass drones. Of course, he's delayed his gases and he's gone into Queen. So Daybreak is a balanced map because the natural ramp is relatively easy to wall off, and once you do so, you are also safe as far as your main goes, because once you have a wall established here, of course your opponent can't access your main ramp because it's hidden behind the ramp of your natural. And of course on some maps they're a little bit weird in the sense of you have to double wall to truly be safe at the top of your main and at your natural too. Vibe is going to scout in and see this Stargate that's made almost immediately.
Here in the shadows.
I mean, he's going to see this Stargate almost at the moment it goes down. This is one thing to consider about maps with chokes this large. I'm not saying that it's huge, but if a choke is more than 2 buildings and a pylon wide, sometimes Protoss will just build their first tech structure right in the wall. Notice that Creature delayed taking these subsequent 2 gases until he had killed Vibe's Overlord. These are little things that you should aim to do because denying any sort of information from your opponent is valuable. Back in Camp Vibe, we have a plethora of drones. Vibe, of course, doesn't really have any tech. He's just now started his gases. He's getting a ton of drones. He's a little bit behind, but look at this. He's pretty much always has 5 to 10 drones up in the production tab. So he was 8 drones behind a second ago, and then he was 6 drones behind, and now he's even, and he's about to, look at this. I'm just going to keep the income tab open, and you can watch what happens when you make constant drones. Even though Vibe scouted the Stargate, notice he didn't make spores super early on when they were unnecessary, because he knew the time that the Stargate took to make and then make a subsequent unit, even with Chrono Boost, was long enough for him to pump out all these drones and then make the spores. So he loses a measly 2 workers. He's ahead in workers. The Protoss player has yet to take a 3rd, Creature. And Creature has made a fleet beacon as well as 2 extra gates and another Stargate. So this screams Sky Toss. Creature is going to take a 3rd, but Vibe has an Overlord in a great position and he's going to see it. Now, Creature's first Oracle was deflected, so he can use the Stasis Ward ability, which can be very helpful for defending counterattacks. 2 carriers are on the way for Creature, so there's an important distinction to be made here, as we see Vibe, after scouting the Sky Toss in third base, has double expanded, he has perfect drone saturation, and he's teching up to Lair. So there is a distinction to be made between 2 Stargate play, Phoenix usually, or Oracle into Phoenix, and Sky Toss, full-fledged Sky Toss. So what's the difference? Well, this Fleet Beacon and the presence of carriers is really the crux of the issue. Now what do I mean by that? Well, whenever you go 2 Stargates into a third and make an Oracle, you can either choose to make a Fleet Beacon and go carriers, kind of this really defensive, turtley, mass air Sky Toss style, or you can make a handful of Phoenix, and then you can even go into Sky Toss if you want, but really, the linchpin here of the statement is the Phoenix. Notice that Creature didn't elect to go Phoenix, he went straight into Carrier right after the Oracle. Now this means that Vibe's overlords are unharassed. Vibe doesn't really have to worry about losing drones. Now you might say, well, he already made spores, he doesn't really have to worry about losing drones, right? Well, if you make 2 Stargate Phoenix, you're always going to be able to do damage. You can pick off gas drones, stray queens, transferring drones. Making Phoenix, as we see a little Ling counterattack here for Vibe, he's going to pick off a pylon and run. This little pack of Lings is nice for Vibe because Sky Toss is very immobile, and oftentimes, especially at lower levels, players who play these Sky Toss styles really had trouble with multitasking. So if you can counterattack them in one spot and make them move their army around and then attack them in another spot, that's a great way to play. Creature has done a good job of building a little building wall up with pylons and cannons. This means that if Vibe swings in with Lings, especially with an unmicroed shift A move command, they're just going to die at this wall end. So the fact that Creature didn't make Phoenix means that Vibe was not really forced to be held back in his base and was not worried about Phoenix pressuring him and constantly doing damage. This means that he was able to get a ludicrous economy, shooting all the way up to 90 drones. And we see that Vibe has started his Carapace upgrade and has a ton of Corruptors on the way. Now, back in Wings of Liberty, Corruptors had an ability called Corrupt that was widely considered a complete joke. And it was an ability with a long cooldown that made it where units that you hit the ability with took extra damage, and it was pretty useless, long cooldown. But in Legacy of the Void, a new ability called Caustic Spray has been added. Maybe it's Caustic Spittle. It's Caustic, though. That's what you need to know. And it's going to burn down Protoss buildings very quickly. Stasis Ward's going off there, preventing the Ling counterattack from doing much. But the fact that the Lings were there is going to be enough to make Creature look. And suddenly Vibe has a whole swarm of Corruptors. This is like that ending scene from The Matrix when they're being chased by the Sentinels. Look at this. And when you have this many Corruptors, the Caustic does a lot of damage. I mean, that main base went down quickly. And now Vibe, I almost called him Caustic, has so many Corruptors, he can run in here despite the ludicrous amount of cannons and pretty much snipe these carriers in 2 volleys. Vibe, remember, he got the Carapace, so these cannons aren't doing nearly as much as they would normally. And he snipes all of Creature's carriers, and that's the backbone of Creature's army. Creature was relying on that to get a 4th base, and Vibe is disgustingly far ahead. So much so that Creature leaves. Look up in supply. Vibe 72 ahead. So let's hit the highlights of that game. Creature went for a defensive style, he didn't make any Phoenix, and he allowed Vibe to shoot up to this huge 90 drone economy where Vibe took all these bases, and Vibe teched into Spire, got the Carapace upgrades, made a ludicrous amount of Corruptors, did a counterattack at the 3rd to draw the army. Notice how even though Creature had a nice setup of cannons and stasis wards, Vibe's Corruptors were still able to get leverage in the main because of this Ling counter. Even though that the 3rd was well defended, there are so many Corruptors that the Spittle, the Spray, it just obliterated the main base. And at that point, the Protoss player knows, well, I'm only on 2 bases. The Zerg is on at least 4, maybe more. So I'm really in a bad spot. And then even though he had all these cannons to hide behind, the fact that he was going straight into this fairly abusive sky toss without any supporting cast, without going Phoenix, meant that once he lost those valuable carriers, he really didn't have any hope left in the game. So Vibe defeats Sky Toss with Mass Corruptor. Notice he was making Lings and upgrading Zerglings as well. If you enjoyed this, subscribe for more. It's free.